Welcome to the Traveling Professors. I'm Professor Bob.
And I'm Professor Sherry.
And together we are
the Traveling Professors.
In today's show, Sherry and I are going to go and visit the temples of Dendera as well as the temples at Abydos. But this is not really about those temples. This is about the journey. Here's a map showing our journey for today. It's a very early morning, and we're leaving Luxor, and we'll cross the bridge at Luxor, and then we will head out into the desert. And then we will come back out of the desert around Nag Hammadi, and then go on up to Abydos. In Egypt, when you travel out and away from cities like this, you have police escorts in some places. So once we get out into the desert, we will get a police escort. Now, the trip out from Luxor to Abydos, we ended up being with a great big bus. Our group is simply our guide, our driver, and Sherry and I. It was an interesting experience. Now, when you get and go on these tours, there are checkpoints, and the drivers and your guide have papers showing who we are, where we were from, and they have to be checked at each of these different checkpoints. It's a little unnerving initially, but it's really kind of it feels good. So this is the direction we're going to go. I'll come back to this map later. After leaving Luxor, we get into the outlying area, and it doesn't take long to get into the rural region where you have various crops growing. You see how the trees are going over the roads here in this one section. And then finally, we reach the bridge that crosses the Nile River. So here we are crossing the Nile. I think the next bridge is 35 or 40 miles away. Once we get to the other side, again, we're in the farmland region, which is all along the Nile on both sides. But ultimately, we get stopped for our police escort. And it takes a while because the escort had just left with a group, and since there's a large bus as well as us, the officer in charge wants to come back so he can get the glory. So we're going to be sitting here for a little while, which turns out to be a good thing.
I believe this is just after we had been waiting for our fully armed escort vehicle to see us safely across the long stretch of the open desert. We waited for quite a while. This isn't an unusual sight in Egypt, but it was a new experience for Bob and me. This odd wagon, complete with tires from a truck, is being pulled by a poor, skinny little donkey. On the wagon is a contraption we might call a smoker or a brazier, complete with hot coals and fire. And on the wagon, you will see sweet potatoes, or maybe they're yams, that are being roasted in the smoker. This is your basic Egyptian roadside diner with street food. Now, at this point, our guides, as well as we, are hungry, so we stopped to get a sweet potato from the smoker. Oh my gosh, I had no idea they could be so delicious. I don't know if they are yams or sweet potatoes, or if they have a different concentration of natural sugars than what we get here in the States, or if it's the slow roasting process, but I do know they were absolutely delicious. If you ever get the chance, be sure and stop for desert street food.
After about 30 minutes, the officer arrived in his car with his driver, and he then joined up with the other vehicle with our guards, and we head out into the desert. And we got close enough that you can see the vehicle in front of the officer's car with the gentleman with the AK-47s. Behind the officer and then behind us is this big bus, probably 50, 60 people. And here is the countryside. I mean, this is desert. We went by several mining sections. There were people who had come out and dumped all sorts of debris. Obviously, I didn't take those pictures, but it's really, you talk about desolate. It is desolate. And that's the other road coming the other direction. So it is a 4-lane highway to get you through about as fast as you can. About halfway across, we then came to a truck stop, if you will. So a place you can get gas, you can get water, you can get food. But I want you to notice on the left-hand side, it has its own little mini mosque. You will find this all over Egypt. If you're traveling on the highways, you will see places like this. They will all have a place of prayer for people. There are businesses that will have their own. If it's large enough, they'll have their own little mini mosque as well. Sometimes the business will just have a prayer area inside the building, which happened several times when we had lunch or dinner. After refueling, getting some water and what have you, we head back out in the desert. And holy cow, it gets even more desolate. Then finally, the bus goes around us, which is kind of strange. We then pass it somewhere because we turned off a little earlier. We did not have the full escort all the way in. Once we got to Nag Hammadi, we didn't have an escort. Once we got back in the Abydos, we ended up with the escort again. So once we got all out of the desert, we got back towards the closed area where the Nile is. And again, you can see the magnificent farmland on either side. Finally, we reach the Abydos area, and here is our motorcycle police escort, who, by the way, has his siren on. It's the only time I've ever been in a convoy with a siren. And then he takes us to Abydos, to the actual site. Here we arrive at the really nice parking lot of the Temple of Seti at Abydos. We'll be back here again. I will be doing a separate podcast on two aspects of this site. One is the Temple of Abydos by Seti I. There's the exterior, the interior, there's a chart of it. And I will do a separate one on the Osireion, which is a temple dedicated to Osiris. Now, initially it was believed to have been built by Seti, but they have found evidence that actually the temple goes all the way back to the first and second dynasty in Egypt, at a time when Osiris was probably the main god of Lower Egypt. So we'll be getting back to that at a separate, all-inclusive show on those two sites. Then after taking a couple of hours here, we then head back out. You can see the surrounding area. And we went to lunch at a gentleman's house that Hoda, our guide, knew about. Had a nice chicken dinner, sat and chatted. There's one thing about taking an all-day trip with your guide and driver. You get to know them pretty well. Sherry's already told you how well that she and Hoda hit it off, and I did too with them. So it was really, by the time we were done, it was like old friends had been together. So once we finish having lunch, it's back in the car, and we head off at this point to the Temple of Dendera. Here is the route that we took on our way to Dendera. Rather than going along the Nile, which I was told gets slowed down during the day, it was better to go to Nag Hammadi and then go back desert road. But we only took the desert road till it forked, and then we went to the town of Naquata and then headed north on the road and went to Dendera. So that was supposed to be easier, and it was. Once again, after going through the checkpoint in Abydos, we have our guards, and we go pretty much back out the same way that we came in. There's another beautiful set of farmland. Here we have one of the canals that come on the Nile, and then we have some cattle, and then it's back out into the desert. But eventually we reach the fork in the road, and when we reach the fork in the road, believe it or not, it becomes even more desolate than it was the last time we came out here. Just look at this lunar landscape, if you will. This continues until we reach the area right around where you're getting ready to go back into the town of Dendera. And when we get into the little town, we ran across this cart. Of course, there are donkeys everywhere. And here we have the two donkeys. They're pulling a cart of these gigantic cabbages. They were harvesting all sorts of food while we were there in January. They were cutting sugarcane. They were at oranges. They were cabbage and all sorts of different things. So ultimately, we get through this relatively small town and head to the Dendera archaeological site. Here we are arriving at the site itself of the Temple of Dendera. The parking lot is not quite the same as it was at Abydos. They haven't gotten around to upgrading it quite as much. There is a tremendous amount of construction going on at all of these sites to beautify them and make them easier to get around in. And then here is the schematics of the Dendera temple. Now, once again, I'll be doing a separate show on this particular temple, at least on the main Hathor temple, which is one of Sherry's favorites, but also the other segments of it as well. One of the great treasures of this, which is a beautiful zodiacal sign on the ceiling, is no longer here at this site. It was taken by the French archaeologists and is now in the Louvre, but I have procured a picture of it. But as you can see from the photographs, it's starting to get dark. We were a little slowed down as a result of that wait at the first police checkpoint, and so it will actually be dark by the time we get back into Luxor.
This is a long day of traveling, and during the day, I got to know our guide, Hoda. While all of our guides have been excellent political and military historians, Hoda has an additional expertise. She seems to know everything about Egyptian religion, gods, myths, social structures, even the ancient practice of giving birth. And being a social historian myself, I was fascinated with everything she shared with us. You can keep your wars and cannons. Just give me a goddess with cow ears and a birthing chair. Hoda brought an amazing package of food to us before we left. It was full of sweets and treats and holiday foods. She brought it to the hotel for us to take with us. She and I are Facebook friends now, and I always look forward to a personal note from her. She's married and has small children, yet took the time and energy to give homemade gifts of food to a travel client. This is kind of typical. The Egyptian people are wonderfully warm and welcoming.
As the sun begins to set, it's time for us to leave Dendera and head back to Luxor. Beautiful sunset. And ultimately, we crossed the bridge at there by Dendera rather than going all the way back the other way to Luxor and came in. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, golly, you were going all day. What did that cost you? Well, for our guide and her driver, they paid for the entrances in both of the sites. It was 104 American dollars per person. So it was $208 for Sherry and I to spend all day touring Egypt, meeting these two wonderful people, and seeing these spectacular sights. And Sherry didn't mention this, but Hoda was an expert at art, and she really made that art come alive in all the temples. Now the problem that we had is, I've had this all over Egypt. What do you tip these people? Hoda had a master's degree in Egyptology, and actually she was doing tours at Hatshepsut's temple when they opened the new tombs and showed the new mummies that they had found. But what I basically did was I gave her 100 American dollars and then let her divide it up between herself and her driver. I consider that pretty cheap when you can have somebody who's really, really competent, and that's pretty much what we did on each of the tours in Luxor. It's extremely reasonable. Sherry and I hope you enjoyed the tour. Please come by our YouTube channel at Bob Packett on YouTube. It should be History According to Bob, but it comes up as Bob Packett. That's the easiest way to get to it. And please subscribe and leave some comments. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please subscribe, give a comment, and if you like history, please come by historyaccordingtobob.com website where I do 6 podcasts a week on different topics in history, and there's all sorts of CDs and other things that you can see. So thank you very much.